My pleasure to introduce Tom Wessels. He is a terrestrial ecologist and professor emeritus at Antioch University, New England, where he founded the master's degree program in conservation biology. Imprinted into the land is the history of how we and other species have inhabited that land, the storms and fires that have shaped it, and the land's response to these changes. And we feel truly that few people can read that imprint better than Tom. His acclaimed book, Reading the Forested Landscape, A Natural History of New England, teaches us how to read this landscape the way we might solve a mystery. And Tom has conducted workshops on ecology and sustainability throughout the country for over 3 decades. And in addition to Reading the Forested Landscape, he is the author of other books, which we'll share with you in a follow-up email after today's program. So Tom, I'd love to give you a moment to just maybe give a little introduction about how you first got interested in this technique, and then we'll get started with the photos.
Okay, well, thanks, Carrie. I guess I got started during my graduate work at the University of Colorado. I was the TA for a plant communities class, where Professor John Marr would every Friday afternoon take the students up into the front range of the Rockies, and we'd find a site, and he'd say, "All right, here's this forest over here, this forest over here, right adjacent to it. Tell me why they differ." And he didn't really give us any prep work to work with. So I can remember the students coming to me and saying, "Tom, what's going on?" I was as clueless as they were, but we all got hooked into this process of trying to figure things out, starting to look at patterns and processes, and it started fitting together. So that was my introduction, and reading landscapes out in Colorado is very, very simple because changes in topography or substrate are really clear cut, and there's not that big of a disturbance regime. But here in New England, it's a lot more intricate and I think a lot more interesting. Yep.
Okay, great. So
All
here's
right.
our first image.
Okay, so this looks like a coppiced red oak with 4 trunks, maybe 5. I can't tell if there's a fifth one in the back there or not, but I can certainly see 4. And this would be from a tree that originally was cut. Our hardwood trees can stump sprout if they are cut or they're heat killed by a fire. But by looking at the size of the original tree, which you can sort of imagine by making a circle at ground level between the center of the 4 trunks that are there, that original tree was bigger than any of these stems are today. And I'm guessing these larger stems of this coppice tree are probably getting up around maybe 2 feet in diameter, just looking at the bark characteristics. So that original tree was bigger than that. And generally, fires do not heat kill trees of that size. They've got enough thickness of bark and enough thermal mass in their wood that they can resist the heat of a fire. So generally, small trees, a foot or less in diameter, can be heat killed by a fire and stump sprout. But bigger ones, if they do stump sprout, are pretty much solely due to logging. So I'm guessing we had a tree here that was maybe in the 2 to 3 foot diameter range that was cut probably, just looking at the bark texture on these trunks, probably at least 70 years ago, maybe 80 years ago, before the photograph was taken. So that's what I'm picking up here, and I don't know if there's other questions that people have about this shot or not.
Tom, this is Jerry. I took the photo, and there are actually 6 trunks. You can't
Okay.
see one of them, but it struck me as very large. So if the original trunk was cut 70, 80 years ago, and it was 2 to 3 feet in diameter, how old was that trunk, would you say, the original?
Well, oak is a pretty fast-growing tree. A standard rule of thumb is if it's a hardwood stem's about a foot in diameter, it's roughly 50 years, 2 feet, 100 years. Red oak is a faster-growing tree, so a 2 foot trunk would be more like generally 60 years. On a good site, it might even be younger. On a poor site, it would be older. So the only way to really age that would be to really get a good view of the bark characteristic of the tree. But I'm guessing, on a site like this, because this site looks like the trees are growing moderately well. A 2 to 3 foot diameter trunk would be probably about 80 years of age. So I'd say 80 and 80, the acorn would have germinated maybe 160 years ago. And I should also mention that our two most vigorous stump sprouters are red oak and red maple. So it's not surprising you have six trunks growing out of this tree, because they send up a bunch, as do red maple. Other trees will send up two, maybe three, stump sprouts, but oak and maple often send up 5, 6, 7, 8, or more.
Thank you.
All right, I guess next slide, Carrie. All right, so here we have it looks like a weevil hit white pine. White pine trees that grow out in the open. And here's another one. Here's another weevil hit white pine, or maybe it's the same shot from a different angle. But white pines that grow out in the open and are young attract the white pine weevil, which then lays its eggs in the very upper terminal shoot of the pine tree. And then when the eggs hatch, the larvae drill into that shoot and kill it. And then the tier of limbs just below it take off to become the new trunks. Generally, if you have a stand of trees that have just where the trunk splits, just two trunks going up, that means they were the first cohort of trees to invade a once open site. Because again, the weevil only go for young pines, generally less than 15 years of age, growing in full sunlight, because it wants a terminal shoot that's as fat in diameter as a finger. And older trees or trees growing in the shade just don't produce a terminal shoot like that. Now, this tree, which has at least 4 trunks going up, means that it was by itself when it got hit. There were no other pines around it. It could sense that and released all of its lower, the lateral branches below the terminal shoot to grow up. And so that's why there's so many trunks in that position there. Now, I can see on some of those trunks, you'll see elbows in them, like the two towards the right-hand side, you can see an elbow in them. They got hit again, but by then there was enough trees growing up around it that there wasn't a lot of light, and each of those only sent up one trunk after the second attack. But whenever you come into a stand of white pine and you see trees like this, whether they just have 2 trunks or 4 or whatever else, you're looking at once open site that was abandoned, and the pines were the first to colonize it. And then if they're fairly young, you can age them by just counting how many tiers of limbs the pine has, because each tier of limbs represents 1 year's worth of growth. So generally, if pines are 30 years less of age, you can accurately age them. So this was a site that was not abandoned that long ago. I'm looking at the hardwoods that came in around that pine, and they're not very big in diameter, and there hasn't been a cutting here. So I'm guessing, this site might have been abandoned something like maybe 40 years before the photo was taken. And the ground in this site is very smooth and even on its surface. Its surface topography, nice and smooth and even, which means that this was most likely a hayfield when abandoned, or a hayfield that had been converted to pasture. That might be a more likely guess, because I'm seeing this one weevil hit pine in the foreground, and now I'm seeing another one way back in the background. To have a couple pines like this in a hayfield doesn't make sense. So I'm guessing this was originally crop field or hayfield that was then transitioned to pasture and then probably abandoned, back around the 1970s, something like that would be my best guess. And I don't know if the person who took the shot has more questions or not, or if there are other comments.
That was actually one that I put in there, and I can't remember exactly where I took it, but I think it might have been in Hadley on Mount Warner.
Mm-hmm. All right, I guess we can go on the next one then.
And I apologize, I had a trigger finger, and that's why we were going back and forth a bit with the images.
Well, okay, well, here we got another one of these weevil hit pines, and again, this one threw up more than just 2 trunks, so it was sort of by itself when it got attacked. It didn't have a cohort of young pines around it. So again, most likely a pasture, because especially dairy cows are not that interested in young white pines to browse them, so they can establish and start growing up before the pasture gets too unproductive and then gets abandoned.
Tom, Jerry again. This is in our neighborhood here in Amherst at the Larch Hill Conservation Area, and this particular pine, there's a corner of the forested section of the conservation area. There are several very large white pines. This is probably 4 feet in diameter, about 2 or 3 feet above ground. So that would be what, a couple hundred years old?
Not necessarily. Again, white pine, a fast-growing tree, if it's growing by itself in full sunlight and it's a good growing site, it's going to put on a lot of girth. The bark characteristic doesn't look that coarse. I mean, the best way to age trees is not by size, but is by how coarse the bark is, by looking at how broad the bark plates are, how deep the fissures are between them. And these do not look like the bark plates are that wide, nor the fissures that deep. So I'm guessing this tree is probably, maybe 120 years, 130 years, but probably not older than that.
Ah, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, I guess next one. All right, so I don't know if these images go together, but obviously the image on the left, we have a depression that's full of water. I don't know if that would service as a vernal pool. In the springtime, if that could hold water for a couple of months, it probably would service as a vernal pool. And then the right, we have this pretty dense stand of younger trees, and they're all single stemmed. I can't see any multiple trunk trees. The reason I'm mentioning that is that if they were multiple trunked, it could have been a site that was subjected to fire and we got stump sprouts or logged. My guess is this is an area that was probably abandoned from agricultural land, and then it just happened to be colonized by these hardwoods, which came in and don't look a very large size. So I'm guessing, maybe the stems here are again 40 years of age, something like that. But I don't know if there's other questions that Liz has or other people have about this. All right, if not, I guess we can continue on. All right, so here we have obviously a river or a canal. The reason I'm thinking maybe canal or something is it looks like it's been banked on the sides, like earth was excavated and then mounded up. At least that lower shot seems to have that aspect. It looks like I'm looking at a mound that's adjacent to this water course. And over to the right, I'm seeing like a lot of young growth with forest behind it. I can't tell exactly what the species are there, so I don't know if this is like a beaver pond that was abandoned and is now drained. I'm beginning to think that that's what might be going on here, that we're looking at an old beaver pond that was abandoned and then drained out, leaving what's now sort of a wetland situation. But if the person who took the shot has any questions about it or other people have other comments, we can try to handle them.
Hi, I'm Tinka,
Yep.
and I took the shots at what we call the Beaver Meadow. We're in East Hampton at the Lathrop community, and it's had a flourishing group of beavers for a number of years, actually. The banked up areas are the canals that the beavers made.
Uh-huh.
The stream itself is the Bassett Brook, which runs through East Hampton and part of Northampton.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're sort of curious about, and I didn't get photographs of the really old stumps. We had 9 beaver dams. We had 2 large beaver lodges that were very active. You could see where the beavers had come in and out of the lodges. They're in some of these brushy areas up here. And our question really is, because some of the canals they had made, the banks are quite deep and very firm, is how many years do you think beavers have lived here off and on? They're gone now. They left last fall or summer.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just curious, has this always been a beaver meadow or beaver marsh, whatever you would call it? Do they move upstream or downstream? Will they be back? We've seen a few gnawed branches in the last month, but not many and no tracks of beavers
Yeah.
this winter. So I
Yeah.
just sort of wanted a little background. It is a mature forest around it, which I think at one point the forest on the right was probably grazed farmland, but not level. The forest on the left, I'm not sure. But it's the beaver dam and the beaver canals, the beaver meadow that we're interested in, possibly the age of it.
hmm Well, the age of it, I mean, it hasn't always been a beaver habitat. It originally was probably wooded. They came in and flooded it, and created their impoundment. So basically beaver were extirpated from this region until we get into, basically the late 1800s. So, probably they may have been here since then. It would depend on how good a food supply they had. They need a good quality of uh, preferred hardwood trees that they can cut down, build up their dams, expand their wetland to get to a new food source and keep cutting. But certainly, if you have all those dams and this much area covered, they were here for certainly a number of decades. I don't know how many, but certainly quite a few. And then they pretty much extirpated their food supply. In other words, there
Oh,
just wasn't
okay.
enough good quality food for them. And yes, then they follow the drainage. They can move up or down,
Okay.
hoping to find a suitable site to start a new impoundment.
Okay. That's terrific. So they may not be back here.
Not for a while. I mean, they often will come back and re-dam up areas exactly where the original dams were. They know how they just basically know the whole dynamics. So
Uh-huh.
they'll wait until this regenerates a food source, and then they'll come back in and dam it up and start over again.
Okay. That's terrific. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess next slide, Carrie. All right, so here we have a coppiced yellow birch. This is unusual. You don't often see coppiced yellow birch. And again, most likely from logging. They cut the stem and then three stump sprouts took off to grow up. So like I'm saying, you don't often see them. It's because yellow birch just is not a vigorous stump sprouter like red oak and red maple. So this is a bit unusual. I don't encounter a lot of coppiced yellow birch. It's
That's
something.
what Liza has behind her house in those
But
woods.
in any ways, that's what's going on here. And again, just looking at the size of the stems, original size of tree, best guess is that it was logged. Although birch has very thin bark, so they're much more susceptible to being heat killed by a fire than something like an oak or a maple. But I'd still probably lean towards logging, causing this coppiced birch here. So if there's any questions on that, we could handle them. Okay, I guess we can go on to the next one. All right, so here we have what looks like a white ash that also looks like it may be coppiced. I'm seeing a line going up between these two trees, although it goes all the way down to their root system. So it may be that these were two ash that grew up, or maybe there's three of them. There might be one in the back. I can't tell. They grew up side by side. I'd have to see this more clearly. If there are three right there, the odds are it's, again, a coppiced white ash, but I would have to see it to be sure. And actually, the tree in the foreground is definitely an ash, and now I'm beginning to wonder if the tree to the right behind it is an ash or not. It looks like the bark is a little bit different and doesn't look typically ash-like. So if the person who took the shot, if they could tell if that stem on the right is a different tree species, that'd be great to know. All right, so I guess Lisa's probably not here.
Yeah, may not be here.
Yeah, all right. Well, that would be interesting to know because then we'd know they're separate trees that probably have grafted together. And trees of different species can graft onto each other. I've seen oftentimes, even between conifers and hardwoods, I've seen yellow birch and hemlock side by side that got tipped down by wind and perfectly grafted roots that you wouldn't have seen because the graft happened underground. In any case, they grew up next to a ledge, and that's like growing between I guess, a rock and a hard place. And the tree can't really expand out. That tree on the right can't expand out, so it's going to flare out. Its trunk is going to get very broad and not very thick, growing out on either side along that rock face. But in any case, I'd like to know if that was a different tree species, because it looks like it might be. Um, but certainly the two trunks I'm seeing on the right are definitely white ash. I mean, on the left are definitely white ash. The one on the right, I'm not sure about. So if there aren't questions or comments there, we could go on to the next one.
Okay.
All right, so here we have a deadfall tree in front of a really nice, looks like granite ledge outcropping here. That tree in the foreground snapped off near ground level. So if trees are alive and they're going to break from either a wind snap or snow or ice storm, they usually break up around mid-trunk height. But standing dead trees develop a rot collar at their base because as you get down near ground level, you get into a moisture microenvironment. There's more moisture down there than higher up into the canopy. And not only that, the roots of the dead tree, the rotting roots, wick water above ground. So you get a real advanced amount of decay right at the base of the trunk. And that becomes a zone of weakness, and the tree just breaks off at some point. So this again would be a deadfall tree, a standing dead tree that developed a rot collar and then just broke off. And that didn't have to happen in a wind event. That could have happened during a rain event, because if the tree has really punky wood and it's a heavy rain, that wood will absorb a lot of water. And if the tree's just leaning a little bit, the weight builds up and it just comes right down. So oftentimes people know it can be dangerous to be out in the woods on a very windy day. Well, it can also be dangerous to be out on during a heavy rain event where lots of things can load up and just break. But a really nice example of, I think, a granite ledge in the background there with an expansion joint that is separating the ledge horizontally like that. But I don't know if there's other questions people have about this or comments. All right, I
I'm not
guess.
sure if Marianne is here. I'm curious where that was taken.
Well, my guess would be probably not in Massachusetts, not unless it's over in Eastern Mass. You don't have a lot of granite in Western Mass, but
It was Acadia National Park.
oh, well, a lot of granite up here. That's where I am right now. So yes, we have a lot of granite up here. So do you remember what trail that was on?
I believe it was one of the coastal trails, probably going out toward Otter Cliffs, or possibly, I'm trying to think of the name of the mountain just across from the trail, one of them. But
Probably,
it was definitely coastal.
yeah. All right, very good. Um, that makes perfect sense to me then. That would be Cadillac Mountain granite right there. So it looks very familiar.
Okay.
All right, so this looks like it probably is a vernal pool. It looks big enough that it would sustain holding that water there. And if it can hold it for a few months, then you'd probably get a good population of salamanders and frogs, like wood frogs and things like that, using it as a breeding habitat. So I don't know if there's other questions related to this. All right, if not, I guess we can go on the next one. All right, so this I think was probably a lightning strike in a white pine tree. I'd have to see more of it, but there's definitely a scar there, and you can see the callus wood is growing over the wound. That's that wood that's curled over, that's living tissue. And looking at the bark there, that's been growing for a good while. So this is an old scar, probably at least 50 years of age. And, it's gotten decay and probably woodpeckers have worked at it. And now you can see the limb whorls exposed. And that's decayed quite a bit in, because I'm looking at that one set that's, about a third of the way up the slide. you can see two limbs that are coming together in a point. Where they come together, that was the center of the original tree, and then those limbs are going out, and eventually, they died, and the tree grew over them, and they're encased in there. But again, a white pine, and I can see 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of limb whorls that are showing there. So not sure what caused the scar, but if it goes a long way up the tree and it starts to spiral a bit, like if it's starting right down at the base in the middle and then it's turning to the right as it's going up, that would definitely be a lightning scar, because lightning always follows the spiral growth form of the trunk of a tree. And all of our tree trunks spiral. And this is part of their phyllotaxy. So as the tree grows up, because of the spiral, the limbs get offset a bit so that they don't lie right above and below each other. And that maximizes solar gain. I'd say, regardless of tree species, about 97% of our trees, if they're spiraling, as you're looking up the spirals turning to the right, about 3% go to the left. So that's genetically determined. The intensity of the spiral, however, is environmentally determined. If a tree is really stretching out and growing up quickly, it's almost like taking a spring and pulling out. The nature of the spiral is reduced. But if trees cannot elongate quickly, because they're wind stunted on a windy ridge top or their canopy suppressed, then they start getting much more intense spirals. So I don't know if whoever took this shot, but if they can, if they can mention if this scar goes all the way up and if it turns as it's going up, that would definitely be lightning.
Yeah, so this is another one that I took a while ago, and unfortunately I don't remember where I took it or how far the scar went up. I was really struck by the pointed branches in the interior like that. That I had never seen anything like that before. So and I don't recall whether the rest of the tree is still alive. I mean, do you assume the rest of the tree is
Oh,
still
yeah,
growing?
I think it is, because that looks like very healthy bark down below that's growing over that scar. So I think, yes, the tree is alive for sure.
So even without the center, it can keep going.
Yeah, I mean it's weakened, and so it'll have shortened longevity. I mean, eventually it'll probably break off in a wind event or something, but it's fine right now. And um, if it eventually can heal all the way across and really put on a lot more wood, then it'll probably have a good long life.
That's amazing. Thanks.
Hmm. Wow, this is cool. All right, so what we have here is a tree that was bent over by weight when it was very, very young. So whenever you get a bend like this, the trunk is bending towards the ground. You can see that in that right-hand side shot. That is from weight. So snow or ice loading, or maybe another tree lodging on it. And it could be that another tree lodged on it, because now we have the scar that's facing upward. So something did remove bark there at one time. Although I think that scarring actually happened quite a bit later, and I'll explain why in a bit. So the tree bent over, and the lowest living branch took off to become the new upward growing trunk. So you can see that on again, the shot on the right. If you look at where the tree bent over, you can see on the very right-hand side of the shot a rounded knob of that tree. That was the original trunk that was going off to the right, sort of paralleling the ground. And you can get an idea how big the tree was at the time. It looks like it was, maybe about 1/5 the size of the trunk that it is now. So it's quite small. And then the lowest living branch took off to grow right up. The reason I'm saying the scar we're seeing there happened later is because um, it's happening on a much larger trunk than the original tree was. So I think it probably is a secondary sort of scar that happened later on somehow. I'm not quite sure how, but in any case, a tree that was bent over by weight. The original tree, you can get an idea of the diameter by looking at the knob on the very right-hand side, and then the lowest branch growing up. And I think later scarred and now hollowed out. But it's amazing when you look at that trunk going up. I don't know how high that goes, but it looks like a pretty big diameter. That tree has the structural strength hollowed out like that to hold that up. But trees, you know, are very aware of gravity. And once they get tipped into something like this, they start restructuring their root system, their tension compression wood, and they can really do amazing things and support themselves quite well. But quite a cool shot.
Sorry, you didn't say what kind of tree.
Well, it's hard for me to pick it out here. It could be an ash. It could be, it looks like it's probably a white ash, but I'm not quite sure. I'd have to have a better look at it, but that's what it looks like it might be.
That was another one that I took around our region, and I was just amazed at the size of it, because literally I could sit in that inner cave. So it's pretty huge.
Yeah, yeah, that's really huge. Now, you know, I'd really like to see the bark on the underside because, you know, we used to have these trees that are very uncommon nowadays called pointer trees that, you know, native people made. They would intentionally bend saplings over to become pointer trees to point to significant features. But, you know, you would have to have a tree that was well over 300 years of age to do that. But that's what I'd like to see the bark. When I'm mentioning this because if you want to age a tree by bark, you have to look at if the tree is bending at all, you have to look at the side that's facing the ground because the skyward facing portion, like we're seeing here around the scar, that can capture wet snow. And as the snow freezes and expands, it'll exfoliate the bark, keeping the bark on skyward facing portions rather smooth, but the bark underneath on the ground facing portions retains the original bark texture. See, I think you can see that. If you look at the right-hand shot, I think you'll see sort of just above the shadow, you can start to see coarser bark down there on the underside of that tree compared to the skyward facing portion around the scar. So if no other questions or comments on that, I guess we'll go on the next one.
Yeah, great, thank you.
All right, this is cool. This is a pretty unusual ground lichen called pink earth tongue. It's a crustose lichen. You usually only find it on drier sands or gravels. It's one of my favorite lichens. And these little fruiting bodies, these pink structures, normally if the thing is dried out, are hardly visible. It'll just look like it's a gray mat on the ground. But then when it gets wet, they flare up and become quite noticeable. But this is really a very sweet shot. It's like I said, not a common lichen, very good indicator of sandy, gravelly substrates. And called pink earth tongue because it grows right on the earth as a crustose lichen. It has these pink structures that look like taste buds, so that's why it's pink earth tongue. So I don't know if there's any other questions or comments on that. All right, I guess the next one then. All right, so here we have a red maple that obviously has been eaten by something. You know, we have lots of various insects that will eat portions of leaves. That's what happened here. And then it looks like there's something else going on with all those brown spots. They could be either just fungal infection or spots that were sites where another insect laid eggs. I'm not sure. But in any case, certainly insects doing, you know, what they do on a tree like this. And I don't know if there's any specific questions about this. I guess if not, we can continue on. Oh, now this looks like it's probably, I'm guessing, Japanese maple as an understory species. This can become quite invasive. I didn't realize this until I was down in Rhode Island a number of years back and saw it in the understory about this time of year when it's turning. I thought, well, hold it, what is that? And I came up close to it, and all of a sudden I realized Japanese maple and a non-native species that can become an understory invasive.
We have a lot of winged euonymus around here too.
Oh, well, that could be as well, because that would be the same color. It's just that it's so flat top. That's why I thought maybe Japanese maple, because when I've seen euonymus, it's usually fuller, where the maple I've seen is flat top. But if whoever took the shot could remember if it had maple-like leaves or not, that would help.
I think it did not.
Okay, well then maybe it is euonymus because that would be the exact same color, also known as burning bush. So it does get that brilliant red color. But yeah, both of them quite invasive. They can be, you know, when they get established like this.
This was in Leverett, behind the Leverett Craft Center, and it's pretty invasive.
Yes, it looks like it.
Tom, a question about euonymus. Do you have any sense of when New Englanders started introducing it to the landscape? How long has it been here?
Well, I don't know specifically with that one, but a lot of these came over around the turn of the century. Some of them brought over actually by the Audubon Society for bird food because they're all berry producers. But certainly one like this would have been probably very important in landscaping because it's a, you know, a very beautiful plant, especially when it turns in the fall. So, in any case, not an accidental arrival like some of our more recent ones. This was definitely imported intentionally, but I'm not sure when. All right, so here we have some turkey tail polypores growing out of a most likely a log. These are a decomposing fungus. You will not see them on a tree or wood until it's already dead, and then they move in and um, create these really wonderful, actually, patterns of growth, you know, on the decaying wood. So very important in our decomposition process and breaking wood down and returning it back to the soil. So they play a very critical role, but also are quite beautiful.
Are the ones that are on the right the same species as the one on the left?
Nope, they're a different polypore, and so you're getting two different ones here. And I can't tell if the ones on the right are growing out of the ground or not. I'm seeing leaves down there with them. So certainly the one on the left, the turkey tail, is definitely growing on wood. I'm not sure what the one on the right is growing on, if it's on wood or not.
Yeah, I don't remember. If it was on wood, it was laying on the ground.
Yeah. All right, next slide. All right, so here we have, this looks like it may be a aspen, big tooth aspen that has died, and it's getting a lot of white rot. So we get two types of rot. I don't know if you can remember that shot that Carrie took of the really big bent over tree. She said she could sit on the inside of that scar. And the inside of that was brown. That's from brown rot. Brown rot basically breaks down the I think it's the cellulose in the wood, creating these blocks. White rot goes after the lignin in the wood and creates just this sort of really spongy material that just sort of falls apart very quickly. So that's what's going on here. I don't know what did this tree in, but then white rot got in here and is really decomposing it down quite quickly. And I don't doubt maybe pileatids have visited there at one time looking for ants as well, because they often are very attracted to white rot, particularly on trees like aspen that are really easy to excavate. So I don't know if the person who took this shot has other questions or not.
I think, could you show the next one? That's the that's the tree right across the trail,
Uh-huh.
and it's hard to see it, but there's pieces of wood on the ground. The snow's
That's-
covering them a little bit.
Yeah,
Is
I
it-
can see that. That's definitely the work of the pileated. That's why I was guessing they had visited this tree because it's very easy to excavate. The wood's soft. They can take it out and easily, if there's ants in it, quickly find them.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next slide. All right, so here we have, I think, you know, I'm trying to make this out. We got black birch here, and I can't tell if it is stilted rooted or if those roots are coming off of something else. So we have a black birch that's tipped to the left on the left-hand side of the shot. And it looks like another younger birch that's growing up on it that has roots growing over the bigger birch. And then we have this other root in the foreground that's growing over the bigger birch. And I don't know where that's coming from, but it looks like it must be coming from another tree, possibly a birch further away. but maybe the person that took the shot could give us more information, because I'd like to know where that other root is coming from, the one that's in the foreground.
Well, where?
I couldn't tell you, Tom. I didn't see any similar tree
No.
nearby.
Where were you?
It was Sawmill Hills.
All right. So, I mean, what happened was there was another tree around there. I think probably my guess is off to the right that had a root that, came over in contact with this black birch and came up over it, because there's probably some soil up there originally that's eroded away. So it may be that this black birch got tipped up a bit, and brought up some of its roots and soil, and it might have brought up the root of that other tree with it. But it's a very interesting shot. I'd like to be able to see.
There's another one following it. And Tom, I have another question though.
Yeah.
Could the tree, yeah, there it is. Could
Yeah.
the tree whose root that is have died and the root still look that healthy?
I don't think so. I think that's a living root that's still
Yeah.
attached to its tree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so here we have, I'm guessing this might be another black birch. I can't quite tell, but it grew up in the crack of a glacial boulder. And it looks like a piece of granite that broke in half, and that tree took advantage of that germination site and grew up through it, and it's probably helping to separate that out a bit. But a very cool shot of a tree that, germinated in there. And it may be that there was other material in there, because I'm looking at the root that coming down the foreground, which looks sort of mossy. And if that is truly a root, then it means that that tree grew up, on, maybe there was a smaller crack on top, and then the root found a bigger crack and came down through it. I don't know if the person who took the shot could maybe tell us more about the growth of that tree. That might be helpful.
I think I took this, it was in Northampton, I think it was Sawmill Hills, and I don't really remember a lot about the shot. I was just really curious about if this tree like forced this rock apart, like did it kind of sprout in a crack and then push the rock parts apart?
Yeah, it's very possible. That's why I was gonna ask, because at first I thought it might have germinated down at the bottom of that crack in the ground, but that root looks like it is covered in moss, which suggests that the tree actually germinated up on top of the rock. So it may have been that there was a very small crack in that boulder. The tree germinated in it, the roots went down through it, and by growing, they're separating that, they're breaking that rock apart and expanding that crack quite a bit. That's my guess, actually, of what's going on there.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Okay, next shot. All right, so here is a nice open grown hardwood tree. Trees, like I said, are very aware of gravity. They're also really aware of light. So if they're in a tight forest, then their trunk is going to just shoot right up to the canopy. Well, that's where the light is. But if they're growing by themselves out in the open, then they really spread out. So this is an open grown tree. As a young tree, it grew up in the open and is continuing to grow out. My guess is, because it's all cleared around it, that is probably, has been a hayfield or was maybe in part of a landscape property, but that tree was intentionally left and kept open around. Or maybe we're still looking at an area that's pastured, but I sort of doubt it. But in any case, an open grown tree that grew up by itself in the open and is still growing in an open setting. There's other questions.
Is
Yeah.
is the wolf tree, is that a term for this kind of thing, or is that a different reference?
Oh, that could be a term for it, and it doesn't relate to the animal wolf. It's a German word that I can't remember. It sounds very much like wolf, but means open. So yes, that would be a wolf tree.
Interesting.
All right, so here we have a hardwood forest that looks like it has regeneration of pine in the understory, white pine. So did the person who took that shot, can they confirm if those young white pine trees we're seeing there?
Yeah, yes, they are young white pines, and that's what made me wonder about this, because while
Yeah.
there are some white pines in the area, they're not prolific, and it seemed like the understory was really robust with all these white pine saplings. So it felt like maybe something happened more recently that caused
Yeah.
all these pines. I was curious.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Something did. And I'm guessing, is that like, did you notice the bigger trees, oak trees?
There are quite a few oak in there,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So I think I have the answer here. When I was doing my undergraduate work at the University of New Hampshire back in the late 60s, early 70s, we were taught we'd never see white pine growing under an oak canopy. And sure enough, every oak forest we witnessed, we'd never see white pine underneath it like we're seeing here. But then something dramatically changed, and now it is not uncommon at all to encounter white pine growing under an oak canopy. And what the change was the reintroduction of turkeys. And pine needs bare soil to germinate into. And so troops of turkeys, particularly in oak forests where there's a good acorn crop, going in there and basically scratching up the leaves, create these germination sites. So now we do get pine colonizing under oak canopies. That's what I'm guessing here as we're looking at probably if you age those pines, just count how many tiers of limbs they have on them. I bet you'll see they correspond with a mast year, and then we had a troop of turkeys in there going after acorns, scraping everything up, and the pine followed with a master of its own and seeded into that bare soil.
I was wondering about that, and I think all those pines are probably about the same-ish age, and I'll have to look back to see if it was a mast year, because they were all about 12 to 15 years, I think.
Yeah, and they should be. They're the same age cohort because pines, don't produce seeds every year. They, have mast years like oaks where it could be 3, 4, 5 years between seed years. So generally you get even age cohorts of pine growing up, and I bet they're all the exact same age in there.
Thoreau wrote about that in one of his essays about the succession of forest trees.
Cool.
Yep.
Tom, a question about how does the pine get so evenly distributed when there aren't large pine trees standing right overhead? There is it wind blown? I know the cones tend to drop, but
well, the cones usually open up on the tree, and you'll notice that pine trees have both male and female cones, but the female cones that hold the seeds are all up at the very top. And that's because they want to release them during windy days, and the winged seeds of pine in a good breeze can travel easily a half mile, no problem. So yeah, they're wind dispersed and can travel pretty far.
great. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, next slide. All right, so here we have it. It looks like, I think, are these both hemlock trees? I can't quite tell. It looks like they might be hemlock, but two separate trees. They grew up side by side, and the one on the right, there wasn't a lot of light there, so it started snaking around the bigger tree to get to the light that was more on the left-hand side. But I'm guessing those are both hemlocks. And certainly the bigger tree's a hemlock. The tree in the foreground, the smaller one that's snaking around, I'm not sure. And maybe I'm thinking it's not a hemlock, because if it was a hemlock, I don't think it would have to snake around like that. They, have very they're really shade tolerant. So maybe the person that took the slide could mention if that smaller tree that's snaking around is a different species.
Yeah, that's another one that I took. And I don't remember, again, not very helpful with my memory, but I feel like they were the same species, but maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, they could be. It's a bit unusual for hemlock to do that, but it could be,
Mhm.
All right, next one, I guess. All right, so this is a great example of what is called a nurse stump. And I'm guessing that this is maybe another, well, I'm not sure. I'm guessing hemlock. So nurse stumps are generally around here, white pine stumps. If you get further north, spruce also makes a good nurse stump. But the stump, as it ages after about 30 years, gets a nice mat of moss growing on it. And that is a great germination site for small shade tolerant trees. So, in your area, the Pioneer Valley, that would be hemlock, yellow birch, black birch. Those are common trees that nurse on stumps because they have small seeds that germinate very well in moss, and they're also shade tolerant. So if you have to wait 30 years after a tree has been logged, usually the canopy gap is closed off. So then the tree starts growing up and the roots grow over the stump and down. So eventually, when the stump completely decays away, you'll have this stilted rooted tree with the roots going down like this. Now, we can get stilted rooted trees in two other ways. Another way is on a nurse log. And again, white pines make a great nurse log. After about 25 years, they shed their bark. By 30, they get a nice mat of moss growing there. But then the stilted rooted trees, after that nurse log rots away, will be growing in a straight line with not only roots going down around what used to be the log, but roots that connect those trees along the line. And then the third way we get stilted rooted trees is if we get a live tree that falls down and you get the tip up of its root system sticking up in the air with earth in it, then trees can seed into that earth and then their roots snake down through the roots of the down tree, sort of radiating out like the delta of a river. So by looking at the pattern of the stilting on the roots, you can tell if there's a nurse stump, a nurse log, or if it grew up on the tip up of a down tree. So I guess Marilyn isn't here, but she could add something if she wanted to, but I don't think she's here.
Right, she's not. Okay.
Okay, next one. All right, so this is a looks like a pitch pine. I'm guessing that because of all the needle tufts growing out of the trunk. This is a fire adaptation. Pitch pine are our most fire adapted New England tree. They have three adaptations to work with fire. First, they develop a very thick bark that can insulate them from the heat of a fire, but if they do get heat killed, they have these adventitious buds that are underneath the bark, in this case belied by these needle tufts. And it's our only conifer that if it gets heat killed can actually stump sprout and grow back up again. And they also make a very rot resistant needle litter to build up a fuel load to attract fire, because they can usually resist the fire and it removes their competitors, allowing them to increase their population. So the needle tufts definitely belie it as a pitch pine.
Tom, this is one I took over by the Quabbin Reservoir.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I'm assuming fire might not have been involved with this tree, at any time in the recent past. So what would make it sprout those needles so low down and right from the trunk?
Yeah, some pitch pine just do this. Most of the time they don't do this. They do as young trees, not usually a tree of this age. But some of them are very vigorous in this way. And I don't know if it's because they get infected by a fungus that causes maybe tumorous growth, or if this is just natural. But it's not uncommon to see pitch pines with needle tufts like this. It's again part of their fire adaptation.
Yeah, I thought it was quite beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that is the last image that we have. And this is a lovely quote that Marilyn shared with us from your book. And so I would just like to offer, if anyone has any other questions for the last minute or two for Tom, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
I do. A question I had heard on a talk radio show about California having discovered that the places that had beaver ponds survived those wildfires, that they were problematic, and now they're, I guess, touting how wonderful the beavers are and they're going to, honor them by having more beaver ponds, I guess. Is that accurate? It sounds like a wonderful thing that the beaver gets elevated finally.
Yeah, no, it is accurate, and it's this has been found out in other areas, not just in California, that beavers really play a critical role in our whole hydrological cycle. They really basically hold back water, and especially in areas that are more arid than, let's say, we are in New England here, they can really affect the ecology in many many beneficial ways by instead of just having all that water run out of the system, they hold it back, and it means the soils are moister, everything's moister, and it affects, fire regimes by reducing them, and it does all sorts of other stuff. There's a number of very good books out there that really look historically at how critical beaver were here in what is now the United States, but originally, of course, it was First Nations land. But they just played such an amazing role, and we don't really know how. I mean, we know historically how it looked by studying, basically archival material and things, but we have a different view of what the landscape looks like today, especially out in places like the Midwest, the Rocky Mountains and stuff. Beaver completely altered those landscapes in ways that would look very different from what we're used to seeing. So they play a really, really important role.
Excuse me, I just wanted to say that I've been leading walks on the part of the UMass Amherst campus that has very old trees. I led 3 last fall for the Amherst Historical Society, and we're planning to have at least one more this spring. So if people are local and are interested, you want to get connected to the Amherst Historical Society, so when they make the announcement about it, you can sign up, because they're limited to like 12 people at a time, so we can actually hear each other talk. But there's oak trees there that are 300 years old. Not many, but a few. Actually cord, so we know. And you can really see old bark.
Wow, thanks for sharing that, Elisa.
Yeah, happy to.
Hi, Tom. I was just wondering, am a grad student and got busy and I forgot to submit my picture on time, but I was wondering if I could quickly share my screen and show you a picture I took out on the pitch pine scrub oak complex out on the Cape, and let me know what you think about it.
Sure.
Yeah. Let's see if I can here. And there it is. Can you see that?
Well, I can see where it should be. All right, there it is.
There we go.
All right, so we have like a real lot of debris down here.
Mhm.
I'm guessing stuff was all like from a previous fire that he killed a stand of trees, but I don't think they're pitch pine because I'm not seeing,
Mhm.
a lot of stump sprouting out of them. It looks like the pitch pine may have been released in that shot. Is that what your guess was?
Yeah. It was just an area I was wondering about. I know there's, some like black locust management that's going on in the area. And it was just hard to tell whether this was something that the Forest Service had come in and done a bunch of cutting, or whether there was a wildfire here or a prescribed fire.
Yeah.
Um,
One thing, I
yeah.
mean, I hadn't thought about cutting, but now you're mentioning it. It looks like all these stumps are the same height, which is a little bit odd.
Yeah.
Did you see saw cut marks on those stumps?
Yeah, and if you look in the foreground stump, it's a pretty flat
Yeah.
cut
All right.
across the side. Yeah.
So I guess that's what's going on. They just actually yeah, cut that stand.
Hmm.
It looks like they might have salvaged some material because I'm not seeing as much big material in trunks, but
Hmm.
yeah, they definitely, I think, clear cut it. And whatever that was is not a vigorous stump sprout. I would have expected to stump sprout. Uh,
Hmm.
but locust does root clone, so I'm not that familiar if it does stump sprout. I don't know if I've seen multiple trunk
Hmm.
locust. Could be if it was a locust stand, they clear cut it, killed the clone, and
Yeah.
are releasing it back to native vegetation.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, and I had one more other question. I was just wondering, something you had talked about in your book about weird apples,
Yeah.
and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, about why you don't see them so much anymore.
Because the last major period of pasture abandonment was back, in the 60s. And these weird apples, they're not fast growing species, they're shade intolerant. And so, given a good 60 years of growth, the young forests that grew over them have killed them, and they've just, and they don't last because they decay pretty quickly. So are sort of an ephemeral piece of evidence that I don't encounter anymore. I used to encounter them quite a bit back,
Hmm.
in the 60s, 70s, 80s, but nowadays I don't really see them at all anymore.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Tom, I have, if hopefully this is not too big a question. In your books, it's fascinating to read about try to deduce the original use of the land you're looking at, the forested land. And you've talked about hay fields and pasture and crop fields. I know the settlers had woodlots. What would typify a modern piece of terrain that might have been an original woodlot?
Hmm. So generally, our first major period of land abandonment in New England is happening back in the 1840s. So if I can find evidence of forest-grown trees on site that I can date back prior to that, then I know I'm looking at an area that was never open for agricultural activity. So it could be an old growth stand or it could be a woodlot. But that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for trees that, nowadays you're talking about trees that are about 180 or more years of age on site. Now they may not be the stems may not be that old, but it could be like that first shot where we're looking at, I think it was that you took of that oak that was coppice. It may be you have coppice stems that you can date back to maybe 100 years, and maybe the original tree was 100 years as well. Well, then that's saying, yeah, this is a site that was you know going back to the 1820s uh,
Mm.
with trees on it. So that would be a site that was not involved in agricultural activity. So that's what I'm basically looking for. I'm looking for trees I can date back prior to the 1840s on site that were not open grown trees like left in a pasture or something. These were
Yeah.
forest grown trees.
And would it be a reasonable deduction if you're walking through the woods and you see an area that is not pillowed and cradled, it's not flat, but it's full of rocks, never been cleared, never been used? Would that have been used as woodlot area back then?
It could have been, but it could have been pastured as well. I mean, it would have been very poor pasture, but it could have been. Um, I'd say even if it's full of rocks, you're probably going to find some pillowing and cradling in there. It just might not be as obvious because the rocks might be so visible. But if it's really, really loaded, yeah, I would start then looking for evidence to say, yeah, this has probably always been left as woodland. And again, I'd have to find trees I could date back.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we've mostly come to the end of our time. Tom, I don't know if you have time for one more question, if there is one.
Oh, certainly.
Is there anyone else who would like to ask another question? Okay, well, if not, thank you all so much. And thank you, Tom, as always, for doing this. You just are so, it's so interesting to listen to your stories and to really learn more and get closer to the land this way. So thank you all for coming, and we hope we'll see you again.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. I mean, when the pandemic first hit and I had to shift to Zoom stuff, I gave a talk for an hour and ended up watching myself on the screen for an hour. I thought, I'm never doing that again. So this was my idea of how to do something that's more interactive for me, and I think the audience, because it's fun just to look at images and try to figure out what's going on. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
Actually, I do have a question for you, not for Tom, because it's the tree you took a picture of that was hollow.
Okay,
Is that at the base of Mount Sugarloaf?
yes,
Yeah, I
so
thought
you've
I
seen it.
recognized. Yeah,
Yeah,
right next to the trail.
yep, it is. Yeah, it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Tom.
okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Have a great day.
Yep.